May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. So my flight home from Heathrow got in at about 8:15 on Tuesday night. And as Jerry and I kind of crunched into our familiar driveway on Mary Street, it was probably about 10:30. And I was thinking then of all of the 1,500 or so other Lambeth Conference bishops, spouses, staffers like me, volunteers, exhibitors, all returning to their own contexts in Dar es Salaam, Bujumbura, Oxford, Rio de Janeiro, Jerusalem, Los Angeles, Panama, Cape Town, Paris, Nairobi, Tana, Wickford, Rhode Island. There are Anglicans in 165 countries, and that's approximately 85% of the recognized states, universally recognized states in the world. Especially for us Westerners, it's really important for us to remember that the average Anglican is not a member of the Episcopal Church in the United States or of the Church of England. Instead, she is a 25-year-old African mother. Sit with that a minute, right? I have to. Our experiences and perspectives in the global Anglican Communion are as varied as our languages, our climates, our races, and our clothing, and our differences both challenge and deepen our experience of God in each other. Because with every one of us made in the image of God, we must fully reflect that image in our grand, diverse whole. If we all looked alike, sounded alike, came from the same place, had the same perspective, we would see only a tiny piece of God's full reflection in us. And as difficult as difference can be, sometimes we're really way less without it. Here's another unexpected and often frustrating truth. The Anglican Church functions very differently from the Roman Catholic Church. In the Roman Catholic Church, whether directly or through church hierarchy, the Pope is absolutely, indisputably, infallibly in charge. Whereas the Anglican Communion is a radically democratic structure, particularly in the Episcopal Church. It follows our secular government in our polity, how we make decisions, how we live together. It's a democracy. The greatest power of the Anglican Communion, and that's all the provinces together, is specifically that it has no power at all. It's relational and advisory only. But it's the glue that holds us all together. Each of the 42 provinces in the global communion is an independent church and cannot dictate to any other churches or any other provinces on any matter of polity. It's all about relationship, where God meets us in the middle and connects us all. Even before the bishops and spouses retreats began on July 27th, the global church press, I know y'all were reading it, bunch of church nerds. The global church press and even the mainstream press was focused on the difference in views regarding human sexuality and marriage between the Episcopal Church and many other mostly Western provinces and the global South, which is made up primarily of African, Eastern, and South American provinces. Now, as you know, the law of the land in the United States of America and the sacraments of the Episcopal Church support and affirm marriage and human dignity of all persons. Full stop. And other provinces of the Anglican Communion, a majority actually, if you stop to count it, come from different contexts, often with direct and continuing threats to their very lives and ways of life, that do not prioritize human sexuality over other serious issues facing their communities. I just want to say here, as a pastoral matter, I would be very glad to discuss marriage, equity, and human sexuality at length and in detail with anybody at all who would like to talk about it. It's a matter of my highest pastoral concern, and you have my full focus and support. Please call me or email me with any questions you have. I would like today to share other news, though. And that is that the focus of the Lambeth Conference, regardless of what you might have read in the press, was actually on the environment. As I heard a bishop say on day one, why are we even discussing something that we've prayed about and deliberated in our own provinces and reached different decisions on? A settled and ongoing difference of view should not be a front page issue. The environment should cover the front page and every other page after that. Leave everything else off. In other words, we don't have to come to the same place on every issue in our many different contexts in order to walk together on the ones that affect us all. On Wednesday of the second week of the conference, just under 1,500 bishops, spouses, and staffers like me attended a garden party at Lambeth Palace in London, which has been the home of the Archbishop of Canterbury for over 800 years. The focus of our day in Lambeth Palace's 1,000-year-old and noticeably very dry garden was to launch the Communion Forest, the Anglican Alliance's initiative to engage every province and diocese in our own individual contexts to take specific action to care for the environment. Archbishop Justin underscored the climate emergency both in the dry, hot Lambeth Palace garden and in the plenary sessions back at Kent, the University of Kent, which had grown pretty dry and hot themselves in the first couple of days of the conflict as we focused on what we disagreed about instead of what holds us together. As Archbishop Justin said, climate change leads to migration as people seek resources and flee life-threatening effects of climate change. Fire, drought, food scarcity, rising oceans. This migration leads to war and conflict over scarce and diminishing resources as two populations who have not lived close to one another and come from very different places and conflicts then are suddenly adjacent, rubbing up against one another and sharing what seems like not enough. Then that war and that conflict further challenge resources, creating a rapid downward spiral. Climate change affects us all, is caused primarily by well-resourced countries, affects the least resourced, and especially island communities like us, the most, and is the most important issue we have together. The Anglican Church is uniquely well-suited to provide ways to collaborate and share information, especially because we're in the business of not being able to tell anybody else what to do. The curiosity and hope also inherent in our faith can help us to have the flexibility and agility of different approaches to fit different contexts. I heard a story on NPR yesterday about the Israeli government's recent repair of the water and sewerage system in Gaza. Now, as some of you may know, I was a bond lawyer for 30 years, and while I in my later life focused on gas and electric power, I did a bajillion, and that's a technical term, I did a bajillion water and sewerage deals. And I'm here to tell you that sewerage, those are the pipes through which the sewage, the goo, flows, right? So the sewerage system, which wasn't all that great shakes in Gaza already, had a breakdown and was emitting raw sewage out into the Mediterranean Sea. The only place that the residents of Gaza had to cool off in another heated time in that very difficult border. While the political differences between Israel and Palestine remain deeply entrenched, the Israeli government was moved to fix the damaged system in deeply depressed Gaza through an appeal to Israel's own best interest in national security. Allowing the health threat to continue in Gaza put the state of Israel's security at risk. And so they made the repairs, regardless of their continuing conflict with Gaza, in the midst of current uprisings, as the rockets flew, as they say. As usual, today's gospel and all of our readings speak directly to this issue. You heard in the epistle, as well as in the Old Testament, about the walls being broken down, the good grapes not being tended, the wild grapes being plucked. Luke's Jesus starts and stays strong. I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. Do you think I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. This passage has always really troubled me. And even more so this time around, fresh from the Lambeth Conference, when there was so much in the air about divisions and difference in our big, noisy, messy, diverse Anglican family. But I wonder, is Jesus blessing conflict here? Or is he just naming it? When we consider Jesus' absolute integrity, even to the cross, it's difficult to hear this passage as a call or even a justification for war, to force others to agree with the winner. Although this passage has been used to support conflict in violence and oppression from the time of the Crusades. Yale Divinity School professor Teresa Berger writes, "If our world were nothing but a place of created goodness and profound beauty, then Jesus' challenge would be deeply troubling. If, on the other hand, our visibly broken world is overheating, plagued in consequence and in turn by flooding, drought, and fire, with rising oceans and melting ice caps threatening all species, including the human race, and we're all caught up in systems of power and privilege that are exploitable and unsustainable, then redemption can only come when these systems are changed outright. Life cannot continue without confrontation. And I think this is the basis of the conflict Jesus is talking about. He's not coming to unsettle an idyllic world. He's coming to shatter systems that aren't working anymore. Habits of life we've grown used to, that we now understand threaten our environment. Kenyan youth climate activist Elizabeth Wathuti spoke at Lambeth Palace garden party, embodying Jesus' call to crisis. She speaks truth to power with urgency because crisis creates opportunity. It's that edge where change becomes possible. Could this be what Jesus meant when he spoke of bringing fire to the earth? Isn't Jesus talking about making things new? Is Jesus taking us to that edge where change is possible and away from business as usual that means injustice and death? Archbishop Maembo Mdolwa, Bishop of Tanga and Primate of the Anglican Church of Tanzania, and I'm proud to say a friend of mine, used the mind the gap warning that anybody who's ever traveled in London or anywhere in England is familiar with. You know that. You can hear the voice now in your head, right? Mind the gap between the train and the station platform. Well, Bishop Mimbo used that to describe the utility of the differences in our big, diverse Anglican family. He said, if you want to stay together as one holy, apostolic, and Catholic church, let us be mindful of the existing gaps. My brothers from the global south, mind the gap which exists between the south and the north. My brothers from the north, mind the gap which exists between the north and the south. Brothers and sisters, all in this conference, we should keep in mind that we have many differences. And those differences, which are created by God, are here to save us, not to break our relationships. Care for our planet's resources must be the focus of our attention as a matter of our very survival. Climate protection is a political issue, a faith issue, a universally human issue, all bound up in power and economic interest, but susceptible to curiosity, faith, hope, flexibility, if we're careful to mind the gap. In our big, messy, noisy, diverse Anglican family, it's okay to disagree. Our strength is in our unity, not our unanimity. Amen.